Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode in a video series presented by KupoCon, where I'll be exploring the Final Fantasy VII compilation lore and Easter eggs that appear in the remake. I'm MJ Gallagher, author of the unofficial Final Fantasy VII Novelisation, the standalone novel The Nibelheim Incident, which is now an audio series also produced by KupoCon, and the new book, Norse Myths That Inspired Final Fantasy VII. The purpose of this series is to discuss a lot of the detail hidden within the remake, and to provide a broader understanding for new and veteran fans alike. In the last episode, I examined Chapter 11, Haunted, covering Cloud, Tifa and Aerith's encounter with the ghosts and Black Wind of the train graveyard, as they race to get to the Sector 7 pillar. This time around, I'll be breaking down Chapter 12, titled Fight for Survival. The video will inherently include spoilers for this section of the game, but anything beyond Chapter 12 is minimal and mainly speculation. However, as always, if you're not familiar with the original story, there will very likely be heavy spoilers. And if you're new to the channel, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. The chapter opens at the pillar itself, with the battle raging between troops from Shinra's Public Security Division and armed locals from the Sector 7 Neighbourhood Watch. The cutscene does not shy away from the intensity of the conflict, and is far more elaborate than it was in the original game, where only the members of Avalanche were present to defend the tower from the Turks and a handful of other combatants. We soon see Barrett, Jessie, Biggs and Wedge themselves join the fray, taking on the infantrymen and circling helicopters. The action eventually focuses on a figure who takes cover on the stairs, then opens fire on two troopers. When he shouts, the subtitles identify him as an Avalanche member, which might have come as a surprise to some players. It's actually been no secret in the remake that the Avalanche cell in Midgar extends beyond the core members from the original, though they are generally only referred to in passing as colleagues. The man is ultimately gunned down on two sides, tumbling through the barrier and plummeting to his death. This is reminiscent of what happens to Wedge in the old game, and has likely been shown here for that exact reason, but I'll explain why later in the video. When Cloud, Tifa and Aerith arrive at the small plaza beyond the train station, they find they are being blocked from reaching their friends, just as the former two were at the tail end of Chapter 4. Aerith pleads to be let through, and the mysterious specters reveal themselves. I last spoke in detail about these ghostly entities back in the first episode of my Chapter 8 trilogy, pointing out that they only seem to intervene when the plot has the potential to significantly veer off course from the original games. This encounter, however, is different, because the characters haven't changed anything about the plot here. Although the remake's Ultimania suggests the primary reason for the obstruction is to prevent the party reaching the pillar too soon, a point I'll raise again later in the episode. To fully explain this anomaly, we have to start looking at the bigger picture in terms of the remake's story. Now, this is something I admittedly didn't pay much attention to in my first playthrough, but my friend and YouTuber Sleepeasy has highlighted in his own analysis series the significance of the colour exhibited by the enigmatic specters, both here and in an earlier appearance in Chapter 4. Without getting into spoiler territory, Sephiroth, and to a lesser extent Jenova, is shown throughout the game to be associated with the colour purple. It's very curious then that the enigmatic specters, singled out in the battles as having authority over the apparitions, should so clearly display the same purple hue. In the previous episode, I briefly touched on a scene inside the train graveyard's maintenance facility, where the ghosts seem to have conflicting agendas. Again, based on what we already know of their purpose, it makes no sense for the hooded phantoms to be intervening here, but our assumption is that they are all acting on the same directive. A definition of what the specters are is not actually presented until chapter 17, so I won't discuss it now. For the purpose of speculation, however, what I will draw your attention to is the existence of the negative lifestream, as depicted in Advent Children and the official novel On the Way to a Smile, specifically in the Lifestream White and Lifestream Black mini-chapters. In essence, following the dispersion of Genova cells around the planet at the end of the original game, the result of which is the rise of geostigma, there are now two separate life streams, one that can be influenced by Aerith, and another that is influenced by Sephiroth. The Spectre's connection to Sephiroth was shown to us even before the game was released, specifically in the key promotional artwork of his character that was revealed back in mid-2019. Keep all this in mind, because I'm going to come back to it in a future video. Once the enigmatic spectre has been defeated, the other apparitions refocus their attentions on the pillar, with a few flying off at speed. As she did when the party first entered the plaza, Aerith clasps her hands in prayer, which has typically been a sign throughout the compilation that she is conversing with the planet. It's so blatant in this case that even Cloud picks up on it. The communication, whether it is a plea or an instruction or whatever, is not revealed to the player, but this isn't the last we've seen of those particular spectres. While we remain on the topic of the so-called plot ghosts, I would like to take the opportunity to correct an inaccurate statement I made back in episode 8, because it ties very nicely into the next section. During that video, I referred to Cloud's vision of the water altar at the Forgotten Capital as being the second time in the remake that such a glimpse of the future had occurred, following on from the image of the Sephiroth clones at the northern crater. There is actually one more before that, and it occurs at the exact spot Wedge is about to plummet onto. At the beginning of chapter 3, as Cloud is making his way to 7th Heaven from the train station, he stops to speak with a resident who is complaining about avalanche. During the conversation, Cloud looks up towards the pillar and imagines an explosion several stories overhead, causing debris to fall on them. What's interesting is that the spectres appear immediately after the vision, circle the ex-soldier, then fly off. The remake's Ultimania actually highlights this very instance, strongly hinting that the vision was due to the effects of meeting Aerith on Loveless Street in Chapter 2. I'll explain how this is possible later in the episode. Intriguingly, Cloud isn't altering the plot in any way here, so there's a suggestion that the Phantom's presence relates to the events of Chapter 12, because there is a significant story change about to happen at this specific location. If so, it could be argued that things occurring at one point in time can affect spectres at the same site at another point in time. Those who have completed the remake might note the importance of this observation. Anyway, when Cloud, Tifa and Aerith arrive at the foot of the pillar, they hear Barrett's shouts and gunfire up above, gazing up just in time to see an explosion send Wedge crashing through a barrier. Unlike the old game where he drops the entire height of the tower, Wedge has the presence of mind to discharge his grappling gun, a callback to Chapter 6 in the remake, though the collapsing frames only stagger his plunge and he is injured upon impact. There's a lot more to the exchange here than there was in the original, mainly because Wedge isn't dying, and it's almost as if the circumstances have been swapped with another of the Avalanche crew, as I'll touch on in a second. For now though, Aerith and Tifa agree to stay at the base, while Cloud enters the compound, prompting some specters, possibly the ones I spoke of in relation to Chapter 3, to shoot upward once more. In the original game, Cloud finds Biggs doubled over the barrier almost immediately upon climbing the stairs. A similar location is presented in the remake with a cutscene, where a wounded Biggs sees the mercenary has arrived. Such is the calibre of the sword-wielding reinforcement, Biggs is spurred on to continue the fight. When Cloud manages to reach his level, however, we find the young man slumped against a wall, guarded by the specters, but I'll come back to them in a minute. As the ghosts vanish, Cloud sprints over to his comrade, and it quickly becomes clear Biggs is in a bad way. To return to my previous point, Biggs and Wedge's situations seem to have been reversed in the remake, because it's now the former who is discovered close to death. The scene is really poignant and gets pretty emotional. Like in the old game though, the player is given a choice of dialogue, but both options here show an empathetic side to Cloud, where the player could still choose to be an asshole in the original. If you select the response, "What about you?", Biggs will remark that he still has some fight left in him. This comment, along with the later lines about having to visit the Leaf House orphanage in person, will likely serve as a double meaning to those who have completed the remake. Biggs goes on to suggest that Cloud is not a fan of kids, and jokes that it's strange because he has so much in common with them. On the surface, this seems like a passing reference to Cloud's circumstances in Advent Children, where he has become something of an adoptive father to Marlene and Denzel, who are themselves both orphans, and goes on to find redemption by rescuing several kids from Kadaj, thereafter helping to cure them of geostigma. The remark may also be an allusion to Cloud's fragmented psyche, particularly his real self, who, thanks to his amnesia of the last 5 years, is technically still a 16-year-old kid whose mother has recently been killed, thus also making Cloud an orphan. Before I move on, I'd like to briefly return to the specters again. I realise I've spoken about them quite a lot already, but their actions in this chapter have some pretty wide-reaching implications. When Cloud arrives on this level, one of the three apparitions momentarily impedes the ex-soldier from getting to Biggs. It's unclear exactly what it's doing, but its presence certainly is not a coincidence, because a seemingly trivial but significant detail has changed from the counterpart scene in the original. That is, of course, Biggs' placement in the tower. I mentioned earlier that the remake's Ultimania specifies the Phantoms deliberately delayed Cloud, Tifa and Aerith near the train station, and the knock-on effect of this may be that Biggs only continues to fight Shinra troops because he sees Cloud reach the pillar at the right moment. By opening fire again, he ends up at a slightly different part of the tower, so the question becomes what impact this may have when the Turks activate the plate release system. If you haven't finished the game, the answer to that may surprise you. Back down below, Aerith has patched up Wedge, and he seems to be in pretty good shape. Curiously, while it might be assumed that she and Tifa would have used curative spells or items to help heal him, they don't appear to try either. The player has the opportunity to observe them before ascending the tower with Cloud, and there's no real explanation for what their methods are here. With the battle raging on above them, Tifa can no longer stay on the sidelines, deciding that she must support the others. Before racing off, she turns to ask Aerith a favour, just as she does in the original game. When she mentions 7th Heaven, Aerith preempts the request by assuring Tifa she'll get Marlene to safety. This comes as a bit of a shock, because with the possible exception of the ghostly illusion of the little girl shown to Tifa in the previous chapter, Marlene hasn't been discussed with Aerith in the remake. Similarly, she later makes a passing comment about Barrett being Marlene's father. These are yet more examples of her seemingly knowing more than she should at this point in the story. Wedge surviving the fall from the tower is a clear and obvious change from the original game, so it becomes ambiguous what his role in the story will be. One theory is that his presence helps to save more lives, and we see this play out straight away. In the corresponding scene of the old Final Fantasy VII, Cloud, Tifa and Aerith find a group of people at the foot of the pillar, watching events unfold without realising the very real danger they are in. Among them are the Shinra officers who guard the road to Sector 6. The men refuse to leave their post, but there's no real pressure placed on them to do so. In the remake, however, Wedge starts to cause a ruckus about how the guards need to open the gate. After an initial failed attempt, the young man gets some encouragement from Aerith, who additionally remarks that she needs to know she did everything she could. This is a very significant line in respect to her broader intentions, but I'll discuss those in a future video. Anyway, Wedge succeeds in persuading the rookie infantryman to let the denizens through, freeing Aerith up to head for 7th Heaven. The sequence that follows is one of my favourites in the remake, simply because it adds a whole new dimension to a set of events we always knew happened, but have never been able to witness. There are plenty of explosions and drama, but what's key is Aerith's conversation with Marl, the landlady of Stargazer Heights and a friend of Avalanche's. Thanks to the Flower Girl, Marl and the Neighbourhood Watch are able to open up the secret tunnel to Evergreen Park in time to save even more lives, and this will play an important role in the next chapter. Battling her way through the blaze, Aerith eventually reaches 7th Heaven. Marlene can be found hiding beneath the kitchen workspace, but the player is of course afforded the opportunity to look around the bar again. I spoke way back in episode 3 about some odd Easter eggs that are included here, particularly images that did not appear in the compilation until Advent Children, set 2 years in the future. To refresh your memory, these are respectively the 7th Heaven logo on the doormat, the picture of the reconstructed bar in Edge, and the low-res photograph of Marlene and Barrett on the fridge, which, incidentally, was taken at Aerith's church. So why would developers incorporate images from the future here? Well, what happens next might provide a clue. Before I move on to that though, I'd like to very quickly touch on something that was mentioned in the remake's Ultimania. Some of the bottles behind the bar contain a cocktail separate to the yellow and red drinks Tifa pours Cloud in Chapter 3. We don't see it in the game itself, but there's also a jade green concoction called the Lifestream, which, as well as the house speciality, the Cosmo Canyon, alludes to the bar's association with planetology, and thus Avalanche. As always, An enormous thank you to Twitter user Itakimochi for her translation work on the Ultimanias. Anyway, when Aerith approaches Marlene, she tries to convince the child that she is a friend of Tifa's and that she has come to take her to safety. Marlene is understandably apprehensive about this, as Aerith is a stranger at this point. Interestingly, despite spending very little time in each other's presence during the old game, and never actually being on screen together, the pair share quite a unique connection. Specifically, this is seen at the end of the original, when Marlene inexplicably senses Holy being released, despite living on a different continent in Calm, and asks if it's the Flower Girl. Another example occurs in Advent Children, where Marlene seems to recognise that Aerith is communicating with them through water. In the present remake scene, Aerith gives Marlene a hug to try and comfort her. The player sees a flash similar to those Cloud experiences every time he has one of his mental jolts. The young girl takes a step back, and her entire demeanour has now changed. She gapes at Aerith in shock, only for our heroine to raise a finger to her lips, as if instructing Marlene to keep a secret. The child thereafter trusts her implicitly. To discuss what just happened, we have to delve back into the realms of speculation. There are various theories that have tried to explain the flash and change in Marlene, ranging from Aerith using certain magic or materia, all the way to some sort of hidden gift of foresight or telepathy being unlocked inside the girl. Such mental abilities are certainly not unprecedented in the compilation, as we see in Dirge of Cerberus with Shulk's use of SND, or synaptic net diving, or even Test Subject P of the Crisis Core side quests, who was capable of locating things using extrasensory perception. In fact, a central part of the plot in the Dirge of Cerberus online multiplayer mode, released exclusively in Japan in 2016, was that the memories of the player character had been fabricated by Shulk to instill hatred towards the villainous restrictors. As the remake progresses, the theme of memories becomes very important, and a strong argument can be made that Aerith has somehow calmed Marlene by giving her knowledge or a certain memory, one that instantly establishes trust. I mentioned earlier in the episode that the remake's Ultimania hints that Cloud's vision of the explosion on the pillar in Chapter 3 was a side effect of meeting Aerith after the bombing of Mako Reactor 1. In essence, Cloud had a memory of something that had not yet happened, just as he does in Chapter 8, when he glimpses the future events at the Forgotten Capital. So this is where it gets really interesting. During the livestream White mini-chapters in On the Way to a Smile, Aerith is able to use her Cetran abilities to help others in the livestream regain their sense of identity by imbuing their consciousness with her memories. The same general principle is also explored in the short novella Hoshio Meguro Otome, commonly translated as The Maiden Who Travels the Planet. The latter story, however, was written by Benny Matsuyama of Studio Bent Stuff, so its canonicity is debatable. Either way, we already have a precedent for Aerith transferring or infusing memories, which, in the case of Marlene, would also have to relate to future events to be able to gain her trust. In turn, the possibility that the game's developers wanted to provide clues to this situation might explain why they chose to put images from the future around 7th Heaven. When Marlene hugs Aerith a second time, she comments that her new friend smells nice, going on to liken her scent to the flower Cloud gave Tifa back in Chapter 3. This flower, of course, came from Aerith's garden. It's a nice little moment that obviously did not appear in the original, but it could also be viewed as a metaphor for the influence Aerith has been having on other people's lives. As they prepare to leave the bar, Aerith tells the girl that they can grow lots of flowers at her new house, a not so subtle hint that she intends to take Marlene to Elmira. Approaching the entrance, however, a spotlight shines on them through the window, causing fright. The doors soon part to reveal the Chief of the Turks, Sung, who we saw earlier in the chapter flying over Sector 7 in a helicopter. Although his appearance here may have come as a surprise to some fans, it doesn't actually contradict the old game, where Elmira simply tells Cloud, Tifa and Barrett that Sung found Aerith while she was on her way home. Sung and Aerith do have a long and slightly complicated history, and this has been touched upon in multiple compilation entries, but I'll discuss it in detail in the next episode. However, as I spoke about in my Chapter 8 video trilogy, part of the Turks' duty is to make sure no harm ever comes to Aerith, on account of her value to Shinra as a Cetra. While Sung personally reveals in episode 11 of Before Crisis that he is not prepared to simply take her into custody. The reason for this is that, without her full cooperation, the company has no hope of locating the fabled Promised Land. In this scene, Aerith appears to understand Sung's predicament, hence the proposition of a deal to ensure Marlene's safety coming from her, rather than from the Turk. Meanwhile, back at the Pillar, Cloud encounters Reno and Rude in their own helicopter, as the former fumbles his way through a contrived and half-hearted demand for Avalanche to stop their attempts to blow up the Pillar. Reno then notices Cloud, again sneering as he refers to him as a first-class soldier, just as he did in the Sector 5 church. This is more in line with my previous observations, specifically that the Turks pair should already know exactly who Cloud is, because they were part of the search for him and Zack in Crisis Core after they escaped from Hojo's laboratory at Shinra Manor. Reno opens fire on Cloud, causing him to race up the stairs of the tower and take cover behind some pipes. With the blonde hero pinned down by the Turks, Tifa is able to catch up to him. Rude notices this, which prompts Reno to turn the weapons on her, only for the bald Turk to suddenly veer the craft sideways, sending the bullets astray. Reno is unimpressed and demands an explanation, but his partner simply claims his hand slipped. This is a callback to the old game, and an optional scene at Gongaga, where eavesdropping on the Turks reveals that Rude actually has a crush on Tifa. If Tifa is in the player's party for the battle that ensues, Rude will not attack her. As Cloud and Tifa ascend the tower, the player is shown a cutscene of Jessie taking down a couple of infantrymen, then coming face to face with a helicopter. This craft is a model that has been newly designed for the remake, the Shinra 0700. Like with both Biggs and Wedge, the specters seem to be influencing what's happening around Jessie. Reaching the level she's on, we see the phantoms hovering above her body, trapped beneath the rubble of a mistimed grenade. Given Jessie's fate in the original game, the ghost's intervention here suggests they have ensured she does not survive the night. Cloud picks the girl up, and she seems philosophical about her actions, acknowledging that she has to be held to account for her victims. This echoes one of the dialogue options from the old game when the player speaks to Jessie, though her comments there imply dying at the pillar relates more broadly to her being punished for the innocents killed during the bombing of Mako Reactor 1. The remake scene itself plays out in heartbreaking fashion, with Jessie still trying to make jokes despite the seriousness of her injuries. I've mentioned before in the series that the added depth to the characters in this reimagining has been delivered perfectly. Nothing more than a few lines of dialogue was afforded to each of the Avalanche members in the original, but the remake has brought us into their world to such an extent that Biggs and Jessie have entire scenes dedicated to their passing. Once again, I applaud the writers for this. After Cloud and Tifa regroup with Barrett at the height of the support tower, the Turks' helicopter draws close so that Reno can leap onto the platform. You might note at this time that the player is given the option of accessing the menu screen, primarily to prepare Barrett for the forthcoming battle, as he has not been in the party since the end of Chapter 7. This reflects the old game, which did exactly the same thing in the corresponding scene. It's also worth pointing out that Rude flying the helicopter at this particular moment does not contradict the original either, because we never get to see the pilot of the Shinra B1 beta craft carrying Reno. As for why the plate separation function even exists in the first place, not even I can explain that one. From the second the Turk drops onto the tower, however, things begin to change. Rather than bolting straight for the control terminal, as he does in the original game, Reno launches himself at Cloud, because their encounter at the church in Chapter 8 has left him seeking revenge. The knock-on effect of this is that the others have more time to react, and while Reno gains access to the plate release system, Cloud manages to prevent the execution of the commands, and then distracts the Turk. The remake Ultimanias state that Reno is pretty cavalier when it comes to rushing into battle, which is mostly, but not entirely, consistent with his character's depiction across the compilation. Examples in the old game might include choosing not to engage the player's party after they defeat Don Corneo in Wutai, and then again in the train tunnels after the team parachutes into Midgar, albeit that's dependent on earlier actions. In Before Crisis, Reno is presented as a senior Turk and often behaves in a professional manner around the junior members. That said, the Ultimanias also confirm that Reno not only wishes to get retribution for his loss at the church, he intends to kill Cloud in this fight. Rude assists his red-headed colleague in battle by providing aerial support from the B-09 craft. However, a barrage of bullets from Barrett's gun arm soon sends the helicopter into a spin, and it crashes on the platform in flames. It is in this moment that we see Reno drop his menacing facade, believing his partner to have perished. Rude swiftly emerges from the wreckage though, and the display of deep camaraderie is quickly brushed aside. This is a likely callback to Advent Children Complete, where Yazoo, one of Sephiroth's remnants, drives a motorcycle through the helicopter the pair are flying in. Reno thinks the worst has happened to Rude there as well, only to find him clinging onto the hatch while the craft plummets towards the highway. In the English version of the remake, Reno uses the line, "Any landing you can walk away from." Curiously, as revealed by Aitake Mochi, the equivalent line in Japanese is, "You better write that apology." Without context, it seems an odd comment, but it actually relates to some trivia found in the game's Material Ultimania, where it says the Turks have to write a formal letter of apology if they fail a mission. Veteran fans will of course be aware that Rude does not participate in this battle in the original Final Fantasy VII, and it isn't until the encounter at Gallagher I mentioned earlier that we face both Turks together. The development team also commented on this in the Material Ultimania, noting that they designed the pair to fight perfectly in sync, as a way to highlight the understanding they have with each other. And, similar to what I discussed back in my Chapter 8 videos, Rude will typically not attack Tifa, just as he did with Aerith. Despite being defeated by the player's party, Rude makes a break for the control terminal, but Barrett's gunfire is blocked by a wall of specters. This is yet another critical piece of evidence that the Phantom's purpose is to ensure the events of the original Final Fantasy VII play out as before, no matter how devastating. They are obviously satisfied with some minor changes though, as Rude is the one to activate the plate release this time around, not Reno. Tifa begins desperately trying to work out how to prevent the imminent collapse, only for Sung to appear on the terminal's monitor. This differs from the old game, where he addressed them in person, aboard another helicopter, having already taken Aerith into custody. Like the hologram of President Shinra at the climax of Chapter 7, communicating with the group remotely makes a lot more sense from a safety perspective. During the exchange, Sung of course reveals to them that Aerith is an ancient, explaining her importance to Shinra for players unfamiliar with the story. If you watch closely, Aerith flinches when he raises his hand for an infantryman to take her away, which may also be a callback to the original, where Sung slapped her for revealing to her friends that Marlene was safe. When the heroes try to find a way to escape the tower, Barrett locates a zipline they can use. I'm personally really glad that they changed this for the remake, because it's something that always bothered me in the original. It was previously unclear what the wire they swing from was connected to, but neither its length nor how it kept its tension made any sense in terms of physics. As explosions tear across the underside of the plate, we see the destruction bearing down on the Sector 7 slums. The mysterious specters again surround Wedge, but I'll have more to say about that in a later episode. And finally, I think the biggest surprise of this entire cinematic sequence was the fleeting cameo of Cait Sith, the robotic cat who was a playable character in the original game. The feline is controlled by Shinra's director Reeve, using a unique ability called Inspire, and we can see the man's personal reaction to the atrocity in the way Cait Sith falls to its knees, reflecting how Reeve begged the President to reconsider at the start of Chapter 10. You'll note the cat is not riding its large animatronic Moogle, and for good reason. Cait Sith appears in episode 19 of Before Crisis, as a secondary character in Dirge of Cerberus, as part of Zack's digital mindwave slots in Crisis Core, and riding around on Nanaki in Advent Children. With the exception of a single image in the opening of Advent Children Complete, however, the Toysaurus, or animatronic Moogle, is not used anywhere outside the original Final Fantasy VII. This then begs the question, will we see it in a future remake instalment? Well folks, this has been my recap of the compilation lore and Easter eggs from Chapter 12 in the Final Fantasy remake. I hope you've enjoyed it, and please be sure to leave a comment with any feedback or something you think I've missed. If you haven't already done so, I invite you to check out my own Patreon account, where you'll find free downloads of my unofficial novelisation of Final Fantasy VII, the Nibelheim incident, and so much more. Subscribers also get access to a huge amount of original content as well, including project artwork, behind the scenes podcasts, or mythology and Final Fantasy articles, etc. And please consider picking up a copy of my new book, Norse Myths That Inspired Final Fantasy VII, which is on sale now. But until next time, take care. I'm MJ Gallagher, in association with KupoCon, and I'll speak to you again soon.